Well, hello world, it's Kokomo Joe. It's time for a video about the socialists slash communists that are taking political office right now, and more importantly, the people that are supporting them. So, the issue is that the people that are supporting them don't know what it is that they are supporting. They are excited about free stuff and lower costs. So, of course, who doesn't want things to cost less? Who doesn't want free stuff? Everybody does. The issue is that's not sustainable. And then there's the other, about fairness and the billionaires making all this money and regular Joes having a hard time. It's not fair. This giant disparity in income between the haves and the have-nots, and this idea that people can't, raise themselves up out of poverty. They need support in order for that to happen. There's institutions that keep putting, specifically minority groups down so that they can't gain any wealth, so on, so forth, etc., etc. So here is the truth about communism and why it's not what people believe it is, and why people aren't going to get what they think they will, what the true agenda of the DSA is, and what its effects will be on everyone, including the currently impoverished. So here we go. So communism at its heart is government control over everything. All production, all choices are made by the government. Now, they say it's the people, right? So we're going to the communism is a true democratic process whereby the people get to decide, and what they decide gets put in place. That is an absolute falsehood. That's not what happens in a communist government. Now, there are elections that are held, and then there's these communist commissions that are formed, and these are groups that have control over different areas of the economy, government, so on and so forth, right? So there's a commission, let's say, on food, right? So they control everything to have to do with farming and food supply, all that kind of stuff. And there's commission on, let's say, housing, right? And the government controls every aspect of that. Now, so in a communist economy, there is no money. There is no property. And when I say no property, I mean you don't own anything. So the clothes you wear, you don't own them. The hairbrush you use to brush your hair, don't own that. The bottled water that you drink, you don't own it. Everything is owned by the state or the government. So there is no individual property rights. You don't own anything. What they will say is that everybody owns everything, right? But how do you put that in practice? It comes down to the government owns everything, and they make decisions about everything. So in a communist world, since there is no money, right, you can't make decisions for yourself. You can't take the money that you earn and go to a grocery store and buy the things that you want. You pick out the items you want, and you go down and here's your money, and here's the products that I wanted. That's not how it works. In communism, what works is you have quotas of items that you're allowed to get from the store. So in practice, what's that mean is they're going to have a record, and they're going to decide for you what items you have access to get. So you'll go to the store, you'll give them your card, and they will allow you to get the items that are associated with your record. So you can't just go and get what you want and then just walk out with it. No. The government decides what you can get and how much of it you can get. And so they basically make this, like on a schedule. So each month, let's say, you're entitled to have 2 dozen eggs, 3 gallons of milk, 4 loaves of bread, etc., etc. And you can't go beyond that. Once you've consumed, or once you've retrieved the food that you're allowed to have, that's it. You can't go back to the store and get more. They won't give it to you because you don't have any rights to that. And you don't have money to buy it, so you don't get it. And it's the same with everything else. You do not decide where you live. The government decides where you live, and they give you access to whatever it is, an apartment, whatever. And they may decide, hey, you know what? 2 families need to live here. And so you'll be living with somebody else. Maybe an entire family, or of an apartment, maybe 1 other person or 2 other people, depending on how large the apartment is. The government decides that. You don't get to decide that. The government decides where you work. So they assign you a job, and you go to that job and you do what the government tells you to do at that job. And one of the biggest things that people do not understand is there's no free lunch in a communist economy. If you do not work, you will go to a work camp called a re-education center. And what that entails is that you basically go to prison where you are forced to work, or you don't get food, or you get, treated worse until you learn that you have to work in order to get fed. So you can't just sit around like you can here in America. If you have access to some social services, welfare, or something like that, you can use that money and not go to work, not do anything. Doesn't work in a socialist community because everybody is expected to work. And the government decides how much work you'll be doing. Ever wonder why that the people in China were jumping out of windows and killing themselves in factories in China? It's because the government decided, hey, you're going to have to work longer. You're going to have to work harder. So much so that the people couldn't take it anymore, and they started killing themselves. And the government's solution to that wasn't lessening the hours or making their job easier. Their solution was to put nets outside the window so people couldn't kill themselves. That is communism. There is not going to be any lazy people in a communist regime. You are going to either work voluntarily, and by voluntarily I mean you're not getting anything for it, or you're going to work because they force you to. And here's the other side of the work. You don't get paid. You don't get income that you can then use to spend on whatever you want. Like, I want to go on a vacation somewhere, or I want to buy this car, or whatever. No. You do not get any money for your work that you do. It's just expected that you work and you support the economy by working and producing, and they supply you with what you need. That little statement that Karl Marx came up with, let's see, got it up here. For each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Right? So, who decides what your ability is? You? Nope. The government decides what you're able to do. So, you work according to your ability that they decided you have, and then you get what you need. That is, what the government believes you need. You have no decision-making ability in a communist regime. The only people that have that ability are people that are part of the regime. So here's another flaw in this whole, capitalist or evil kind of thing. This idea that, 10% of the population control like 90% of the income, right? So they got all this wealth. So they're the ones that are controlling everything. So in a communist regime, it's the government that controls everything. So it's the government that decides who gets what and where the wealth goes and what it's spent on. So you have an even smaller percentage of the population that not only has all the wealth, but has all the power. Now, a billionaire isn't going to go around trying to control everything that their employees do. They're not going to say, hey, our employees can't eat meat, and they cannot drive in a combustion car. They must have an electric vehicle. A corporation can't impose that on its employees. But a communist regime can, because they supply all the goods. Production is held in the hands of the state. Everything belongs to them, and they get to decide how it's used. A clear example of that was in Soviet Russia. So when the Soviets, when they took over whenever the communist revolution happened, they went out and killed all the rich people, which in that era were farmers. So they went out and they killed or imprisoned all the rich people or the farmers. And then they sent people from the city out to these farms to farm, to produce food. Well, these city people had no idea how to farm, and so the crops failed, right? And then people starved. It wasn't the government that was going around shooting people as much as it was governmental decisions causing, failings like that, which led to starvation. That's how people died. They starved to death because the government was making poor decisions about who did what. So these new farmers, these city people that were on these farms, the crops are failing. And the government's showing up and saying, hey, give us all the food and we're going to take it and distribute it. Well, some of those farmers kept some of the food that they produced. And you know what the communist regime did? Did they say, well, that's okay. I mean, you were the one who, planted the seed and worked the fields and harvested it all and set it aside. So, of course, you're entitled to have some of this for yourself. No, they hung those people because they were stealing from the state. So they were supposed to, even though their children were starving up there in their houses, they had to turn everything that was produced over to the state, and the state carried it off and then redistributed it back to them according to what the state thought they needed. So that's going to be the end of this video. I think I've talked enough about this so far, but there's more to discuss. And those same ideas are going to happen here if these plans are implemented. They've made it clear that they are communists. They want the means of production to be controlled by the state. They say the people, but what they mean is the state. They're not going to have the entire population of the United States controlling and making decisions about how everything is produced. That's not going to happen. When they say the people, they mean the elected people that are elected to make the decisions about how everything is supposed to be produced and who gets what. So I'm going to stop for now. In the next video, I'm going to talk about where communism actually works and what things have to be in place for it to be successful.